and you are. This is the Community Hour, and this is Councillor Shaban Mohammed. I have some very special guests here today, joining me. Councillor John Whitworth and Councillors Anam Islam of Forest Gate North Ward, and John Whitworth of West Ham Ward. Can you just give us some introductions, guys?
Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, I'm a councillor in West Ham Ward. Been a councillor since 2014 and was for 4 years earlier, 2002 to 6. And I'm very happy to be here today to take part in the programme with Councillor Shabs.
On Ramadan FM 2018, John. And
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. I am Councillor Anam Islam. You can call me Anam. A brother in Deen. Been elected to serve Forest Gate North in 2016 following a by-election. And I've been re-elected recently on the 3rd of May. And I am on Ramadan Radio FM 2018. And I'll pass it back to Shaban.
Yeah, today the topic we're going to be discussing is the British Empire, and John is a historian and has a deep knowledge of the British Empire. Can you give us some of the stuff talk about the British Empire, John?
Yeah, well, one way in to talk about the British Empire is to talk about perhaps my first engagement in politics, which goes back to when I was a student at a College of Education in Bedford. And it goes right back, if I betray my age, it goes right back to 1969 to 72. Those years I joined the United Nations Student Association, and I became a member of the Southern Africa Committee because I was very interested in the anti-apartheid movement, and so I got involved in that. We were also concerned with what was known in those days as the liberation movements in certain European colonies that had not been given their independence yet, notably Portugal. So I was working for the raising money, in fact, for the liberation movements in Mozambique, Angola and Guinea-Bissau, as well as campaigning for the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, Namibia and what was then Rhodesia, which became, of course, Zimbabwe.
I mean, the anti-apartheid movement in the UK was very, very big, and I mean, it shaped a lot of stuff that went on in the UK in regards to racial relations. How about you, Anam? What was your journey into the
politics?
Yeah.
Myself, in terms of politics, well, it came through life experience. I mean, certain experiences that I encountered growing up as a child. Remember my mum taking me to nursery school as a young boy, and we used to get eggs and flowers thrown at us. And I couldn't understand what was going on at the time. What I do remember, my mum dragging me, crying, to the schools and back. Obviously, as I grew up, I realized it was like sheer racism. Yeah, and so growing up as a kid, I sort of naturally got attracted to the anti-racist movement and any movements involving social justice, etc. One of the organisations that directed people like myself was Neo Monitoring Project, which used to be based in Stratford many years ago. And naturally, you get attracted to, any causes. If there's anything wrong or any injustices anywhere, whether it's locally, nationally, or internationally, you naturally feel attracted to that direction. So I mean, getting involved through those various campaigns, I found myself being elected as a trade union representative within my workplace. I used to be a former civil servant, collective 16 and a half years in the civil service, and I remember going in there within months. I was scouted by local officials to be involved in the movement. So I mean, and naturally, I just found my way into politics, and then Jeremy Corbyn happened, and
it's very interesting that we actually share the same life experience of growing up in Newham. I mean, we used to talk about how diverse Newham is, but probably in the early 60s and 70s and 80s, it weren't so much diverse as it is now, and accepting of people from different races and colours and creeds. I think it's a lot more diverse, a lot more vibrant, and I see a lot more people getting on. Would you agree with me, John?
Yes, I think this is absolutely true, Shabs. Things have improved in Newham over the years with the increasing diversity of the population. After I finished my student years, I did sort of go on a trip, actually, where I got to know the countries as far as India, to give me a personal view, a bit of the lives. Yeah. But I wasn't particularly aware of the immigrant groups in this country. And that was one thing that things like the anti-apartheid movement has sometimes been criticised for. It was certainly in my case, we were focused on injustice overseas in the British Empire, but we weren't really aware of the injustice going on around us. We weren't really focused on that. And it was true of my case as well.
You know, even for I mean, most people that came over from the subcontinent, I mean, they've had a lot of struggles, and you know, this our movement. You know, when we talk about Western imperialism and stuff like that, I mean, it's quite a wide topic to talk about and to cover. Would you agree?
It is indeed, and we can have a look perhaps at perhaps the Asian side of things.
Yeah.
And if we go back to South Africa, it was multiracial more than most other countries in Africa, as you may well know, because you've got it was the country with the largest white settlement, both from Britain and also originally from the Netherlands, people who became known as the Boers. You know, the Dutch for farmer. You had quite a big white population and mixed race population of the early Dutch settlers with the local Africans and slaves from Malaysia, known as the coloured population. And plus you had a large Asian population dating from the 19th century, when people were brought over as workers, you know, on the farms and so on. And this, of course, coming over with them, of course, Mahatma Gandhi came over not as a worker but as a lawyer, but he was part of this population, and that got him politicised, I think, in the first place, is the time he spent in South Africa.
I think it was originally when he was on the train, and he was sitting in first class, and the story goes that he was carted off to back of the train. That was that's what actually started him off with this the anti-British movement and freedom and more rights for coloured people in the world. Would you say? Especially in India.
Yeah, I think it was a wake-up moment for him, because he had obviously had quite a privileged background, was very well educated, but a well-educated Asian man, dressed very smartly, was treated badly because of his appearance. That is his ethnicity, you know, so it's pure racism, which he perhaps learnt about at that moment. Yes, and if we can go back a bit further, if you like, because it was agreed we talk a bit about the British Empire and Western imperialism.
Let's start the topic off.
Because it's well known that the British were not the first Western imperial nation. They didn't get off to a fast start, because we're going back to the 16th century. It was the Portuguese and Spanish got vast colonies in South America, divided up South America, and of course what known as Latin America, as far as the USA, which didn't exist then. They also had colonies in Asia, particularly the Far East. The Spanish had colonies in the Philippines and what is present-day Indonesia, and the Portuguese had presence in India, the west coast of India.
In Goa.
In Goa, particularly, where they stayed, incidentally, till 1962.
It's quite a rich history of colonisation that went on in the subcontinent. If you look at all the different groups that actually went to the subcontinent, but probably the biggest groupings were the British and the Portuguese. And Am I right?
You are indeed right. It was the Portuguese had the first presence there, like trading posts really and fortresses to protect them, because the Europeans went to India and the Far East for trade, because there luxury goods were being produced that the Europeans wanted, the wealthier Europeans wanted, and also an area which was recognised as a rich industrial area was Bengal, as it was then known, where they produced Muslim silk, cotton textiles.
Mousseline Street.
Is it called Mousseline?
Moslen, right?
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
And I think you're missing probably one of the most important things that the British and the Portuguese went there for was the spice, including cinnamon.
Exactly. Yep,
Yeah.
that came from India.
Yeah.
And of course, a lot of it came from present-day Indonesia, which a people we haven't spoke of yet. It was the Dutch and the Portuguese and Spanish got in there first, but then the Dutch followed.
Yeah.
And they established colonies in Indonesia. Again, it was to secure the production of spices,
Yeah.
which were, as Shab said, they were the richest goods of all, which they'd come overland from Asia into Western Europe in the Middle Ages, but they were very, very expensive. So European traders wanted to get a cheaper source of these spices, which the wealthier European families craved. And the Dutch took over. The Dutch also had a presence as well in the Indian subcontinent, particularly in Sri Lanka. And some of the Christians in Sri Lanka have actually Dutch surnames to this day to show the trace, among the Christian community. But then they were replaced they replaced the Portuguese in Sri Lanka, and then of course British took over because we established the East India Company around 1600, the same time as the Dutch established their East India Company, and we particularly targeted the Bengal because it was regarded as a rich industrial area. And gradually things spread from there.
And I think, would you say obviously once these trading companies came into the subcontinent, started having a larger influence on the subcontinent and actually bringing their ways of trading, and obviously we ended up with railways and bits. Or did the railways come later on?
That was later on. That was in the 19th century, but that's a trace, an important trace left in the subcontinent to this day, isn't it?
Yeah.
The railways.
Well, originally it was intended to export goods out of those part of the world. But in hindsight, it appears that it's become good use to some of the people who are still living there.
Well, even in when I go back to Pakistan, there's a rich history of British railways, and some of the tracks and the stations are still there intact after all these years, which is really, really interesting. You can't miss some. In fact, some of the bridges that go over the rivers are still British, built by the British, are still there in place.
The quality bridges and the railway tracks are quite quality to date. I'm impressed. I mean, I've been in Bangladesh and I've seen some of the railway tracks, and I've been on the trains there, and it's fascinating for a developing part of the world to have such infrastructures left behind by the British Empire, and that's probably one of the things I will commend. However, if you look at the purpose behind those railway tracks, I mean, I come from an anti-colonialist movement, I'm an anti-imperialist. So you will find that I could be a little bit cynical about some of these amenities left behind by the British Empire. But in hindsight, I think it's worked out good for the people. Whether the intention were good or not, that's a different matter.
But I think at the end of the day, you've got to look at the vast poverty that was left as well. I mean, once the British left India, and obviously we had the partition come into place. I mean, it literally left vast amounts of poverty in a lot of the regions, and chaos.
Yes, indeed. I mean, I think you're right in pointing to the railways, because we know that the legacy of the British Empire is mixed, to say the least, and mostly, I would agree, mostly negative, but that's probably one of the good things. There's a very impressive rail network in the whole Indian subcontinent. If we go back to the way the British presence developed, it was trade that brought them there, and the profits they could make by shipping goods back to Europe. But that dragged them gradually into Indian politics, which was then, of course, a large number of different states.
Maharajas, and it was quite a volatile situation at the time as well. I think when the British got there, I mean, it was literally states fighting over states for stakes of land. Am I right?
Exactly. There was a lot of conflict between the different states, and you had the old Mughal Empire in the north was still quite powerful when the British, very powerful when the British arrived in 1600, and the British had to be careful what they did in the early days. But when you get into the 18th century, the Mughal Empire was weaker, the states were competing, and other powers were there. We mentioned the Dutch, the Portuguese. There was even the Danes had a couple of trading posts, and the French became more and more involved. And in fact, when you get to the 7 Years' War, 1756 to 63, one of the theatres of war was between the French and British was on India, where the French could have actually established big colonies there, but they were beaten really by the British, and finally beaten when the pro-French Sultan in 1799 was beaten by the young Duke of Wellington, or Sir Arthur Wellesley as it then was. And then the British took over, became influenced in the whole of India after the Battle of Seringapatam, when the Muslim leader in southern India, who was pro-French, Tipu Sultan, was killed in his fortress at Seringapatam, and then the British were the dominant European power. Or when we say British, it was still the East India Company, who even had its own army. It wasn't even the British army; it was the company's army,
which employed a load of Indian soldiers as well.
Oh yeah, indeed.
Yeah, which is quite interesting, and that's where obviously the trade element started, and obviously. Newham has probably got a link there because of the docks. I mean, a lot of the goods that came in from India at the time were actually coming into our docks in Newham at the time. Am I right?
Absolutely, John? Absolutely. The Indian trade was very important.
Go on.
Isle of Dogs too, right?
Indeed, the Isle of Dogs.
Yeah, Isle of Dogs.
Right along the Thames. Yeah.
It's obviously a real big money spinner for the British. India at the time. Yeah,
it was, and it's fair to say, if we look at where the main British presence was for longest, in the province of Bengal, which you know very well today, Bangladesh, and a bit of it's in India. The industrial production was more per head, was more productive there than it was in Britain, way past the year 1700, right into the 18th century. But when the British established more of a presence, it became deindustrialised. It was run more and more for the needs of the traders and the needs of Britain, and actually went into a period of decline with the British presence there. It has to be said.
I mean, as well as we're talking about spices. I mean, there was talk of gold and everything else coming out of India. Is there any truth in that? Jewellery, diamonds. Mining.
I think there were mines of precious stones. I'm not very familiar with that, but I know, of course, the rulers, their jewellery, the Rajas and so on, is legendary, and many of the jewels are actually stolen and brought back. There was certainly plenty of jewels around in India, as indeed they are today. I'm not quite sure where they were mined. Some of them may well have been mined there as well, but that was one of the exports that passed through India, certainly.
Okay, we're just going to go for a short break, and we'll be joining you back in a little while.
They've got it. We can go see them at 51 to 53 Upton Lane, Forest Gate, E79PA, or call them at 07984 440 093, or visit ukwindowslondon.co.uk.
वाह जी वाह, ये तो कमाल है यार.
UK Windows
जिंदाबाद.
Thinking about selling or letting your home? With Maxwell Estates, you don't need to look any further. Well established with over 15 years of experience, Maxwell Estates are specialists in residential sales and lettings. We manage over 200 properties in and around Northwest London, keeping our landlords and tenants updated with all the latest laws and legislations. Based in Edgware, our experienced specialist negotiators always ensure we maximise the full potential of your property. Call us now on 0208 952 0808 for a free no obligation quotation, or visit our website www.maxwellestates.co.uk for further information. Maxwell Estates, the name you can trust.
With over 25 years experience in the East London area, there's no better firm to rely on than Cameron Adams Century 21 when it comes to properties. Be it lettings, property management or sales, we can assist you to ensure you get the most out of your property. Contact us on 0208 558 2000 for a free, no obligation valuation and watch us do what we do best.
Grab your taste of luxury at Pink's Boutique. Designer brands like Hugo Boss and Armani to keep your style in check. Catering for ladies, men and kids, Pink's Boutique has it all under one.
Welcome back, brothers and sisters. You are listening to Ramadan FM. This is your host, Councillor Shaban Mohammed, and we have our two studio guests, Councillor John Whitworth and Anam Islam. And today we are talking about the British Empire, and the next topic is the end of the East India Company, John.
Yes.
India.
Well, it seems strange today that a private company, should rule such vast areas in the other parts of the world. I think most historians agree that it came about in a way by accident. The company was there for trade and to make profits and secure the sources of income, but it got roped into Indian politics really by the competition between the different Indian states trying to play off the British and the British playing off them. And when we get into the 19th century, the East India Company controlled large areas of Indian territory. And when we go to 1857, when we had a revolt among the soldiers, because most of the troops of the company were of course, what we used to call native soldiers, indigenous people. Yeah. They revolted, and there was a big sort of war, which I believe in India today is called the First War of Independence or something of that sort. Yeah. It was a kind of war of independence, after which the British put down the revolt with
the
mutiny, considerable loss of life, and then the upshot of that was that the Great Britain took over the running of the India,
company, yeah,
because the old Mughal Empire was still going, but as a kind of a puppet. The emperor abdicated, so Britain took over the lands of the Mughal Empire, and in fact all the other states. I mean, they let the rulers stay in their palaces and with their titles and so on, but the actual rule was by Britain. And so much so that a few years later, Queen Victoria was given the title Empress of India, which was symbolic, but it did tell everybody that India was now ruled by Britain.
And probably most significant, during the First World War, a lot of Indians joined the British Army to actually go and fight in the trenches. Am I right?
Absolutely right. And it's only with these celebrations, this tended to be overlooked for a long time, but the spotlight was shone on this quite a lot with the centenary celebrations, commemoration, which we're having of the First World War. It's recognised that troops from the Empire, and particularly the Indian subcontinent, played a major role, and many sacrificed their lives. I
mean, when you obviously when you look at a lot of the red top newspapers and a lot of the press, Indian soldiers and the role that India actually played in not just the First World War but the Second World is never talked about and never highlighted. I mean, would you say that's true?
It's definitely true. Yes.
It's quite a shameful thing that it's never highlighted that we how big a role the subcontinent played in the First and the Second World War.
Yeah, absolutely. There were some theatres, because India was nearer. They played a role in the Middle East, in Egypt, the Middle East, in Iraq, where there's a lot of fighting going on against the Ottoman Empire, and indeed Gallipoli.
Yeah.
They lost a lot of people there, as well as in Western Europe in the trenches. So it was a big sacrifice, which only now is being fully acknowledged, I think.
Yeah, I mean, about the end of British rule, what would you say? I mean, obviously, even like our forefathers, we talk about the partition and how chaotic it was, and you know obviously we lost a lot of innocent lives during this partition and the chaos that it actually caused. What would you say about the end of British rule?
I mean, if you look at India, the partition, I mean, well, the end of British rule in India in 1947, the Mountbatten was it Lord Mountbatten?
Yeah.
Can't pronounce his name.
Yeah.
I don't want to pronounce his name, but I'll have to for the course of this interview. The Mountbatten partition that was planned, it was obviously executed before they left. And in that partition, which you find mainly Pakistan, India was divided not into just two pieces, but various pieces. And you found that the Muslims were forced into the bits that was formed as Pakistan.
Yeah.
And then you had the Hindus who were kept in India. Now, the funny thing about Pakistan was the way Mountbatten planned the partition was that Pakistan was put into two sides of India.
Yeah, that's right. I think it was divided on religious grounds. I mean, if you look at the two parts that the Muslims ended up with, they were mainly predominant Muslim areas.
And I mean, that was like the two known countries. But then you had the Kashmiri, the dispute with Azad Kashmir, and all these other little bits.
Yeah.
Then you move away. I mean, I'll come back to that in a bit. This is just India, Mountbatten's partition, and then you move over into the Middle East, following the fall of the Ottoman Empire, and the partition. I think 1918, or was it 19? Was it 1918?
Yeah, the treaties after 1918.
The treaties after 1918, you found all this partitioning going through all the Middle Eastern lands, and now we've got problems.
Yeah.
So these partitions didn't leave any peace or harmony behind, but it left chaos in those lands.
It was like, how can I put it? I think it was like a divide and rule politics that was played out, and today it's still going on in mainly in the Middle East, and even to this point on the Indian subcontinent with Kashmir.
And what you found is the people that following the partition, you found that certain rulers were governing those part of the lands. And if you look at the background of these rulers, I mean, are they really fit to be rulers, or do they qualify to be more of a dictator stroke autocrat? I mean, what you found that most of those rulers that were left behind there, the masses, the people in those lands, I don't think they took it lightly. I mean, you can see in some of the lands that there have been resistance to oppose those rulers. But those rulers, or if you look at is it the lineage?
Yeah, well, obviously.
Going back, I mean, they were left behind by the British Empire.
Yeah.
And what people today, if you look at historians in those parts of the region, they still question what was the motive behind the British Empire before they left those lands. What was the intention behind that? I mean, you don't leave a dictator, an autocrat behind. Like, I mean, if you look at the Saudi Arabia. I mean, I'm not in Saudi Arabia, so I can comfortably talk about this. I mean, if I said this in Saudi Arabia, I'd probably be locked up in some prison. So So I mean, if you look at the Saud family, I mean, look into their background and the history. Where did they come from? I mean, why would the British Empire leave someone like the Saud family in charge of?
I mean, at the end of the day, there's a lot of things that we got that the British did were quite debatable. But I mean, when you go back to the partition of India, I mean, it was done on literally religious grounds, and what it did was leave disharmony and chaos and mistrust between probably two religions that probably before the partition actually got on with each other. Am I right, John?
I think that was a result, because there's a long history of coexistence and often harmony, isn't there, between the different religions of India, mainly Hindu and Muslim, but there's some smaller religions as well. A tradition of getting on pretty well with each other. I think the British realised after the Second World War that India was ungovernable as a colony, and quite rightly. I mean, you could say they shouldn't have done it in the first place, of course, so that was the truth. But to leave and give independence was obviously the right thing, but the way it was done, it was rushed and panicked, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And this helped create distrust of other communities,
Yeah,
and
that's
so
right.
you had populations moving around, and I think as well it needed to be planned more with the leaders of the time.
Yeah.
I don't know the history of all the leaders, but the two people that stand out apart from Gandhi, who didn't want partition, did he? Because he was for different religions living together, in a harmony. And I think when Pakistan was created, Gandhi actually paid a visit to Pakistan to, in a comradely manner.
Yeah.
But it was Muhammad Ali Jinnah was the founder of Pakistan, wasn't he?
Muslim League in 1906.
He thought that the Muslims needed their own country to guarantee their protection.
Yeah, I think what it was, again, it was a lot of misharmony created by the British, and obviously the divide and rule aspects do come into a lot of what went on during the British Empire.
Yes, and it was ill prepared. There was also Nehru was one of the Hindu leaders, wasn't he? He became the Prime Minister of India. It was badly done, and as you said earlier, divide and rule did help to create disharmony between the two communities. And when partition was announced as the way forward, it created a panic on where would the lines be drawn.
Yeah.
And which side of the borders would you be on? And that stirred up the atmosphere of fear, which created the violence. So the partition, obviously the independence was good, but the partition was disastrous, wasn't it?
And what it left behind, I mean, what was actually left behind was adverse poverty and confusion, and even today you can see it. I mean, if you look at the subcontinent, where has it gone? It's not actually growing. I mean, countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh, even though their poverty is still there and it's rife, even no matter how much money's been given in aid and everything else, the poverty element and the hospitals and the care of people is still not there after all this time.
I mean, if you look at the partition, the way it was done, for example, and Calcutta was the capital of India, but it was part of Bengal.
Yeah.
And we had East Pakistan and West Pakistan, and I always get it confused. I don't know whether East Pakistan is nowadays Bangladesh.
Bangladesh, yes. You're right.
So East Pakistan was effectively Bengal without Calcutta.
Yeah.
Calcutta cut out and put into India.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons that happened was Calcutta was the capital city at the time of India, and it was the money district.
Yeah.
Yeah, where all the trades, the ports, and all the incomes were
there,
Calcutta.
yeah.
So the money district was cut away from Bengal. When the partition happened, and the way it happened, it wasn't, and the money was not distributed very correctly either. I mean, so that was also another factor in going into the dispute. But I mean, moving on from that, I mean, what we want to look at, I mean, post East India Company, or was it post imperialism?
Post empire.
Post empire.
Post empire. I mean, going post empire, looking at those part of the regions and looking whether you look at India, look at Bangladesh, Pakistan, or in the Middle East. Have we really seen any progression any positive change following the departure of the British Empire from this region? I mean, that's the question to ask.
Yeah.
Or are we seeing more problems in those part of the region? And that's an interesting discussion to have and explore. And to date, I scratch my head and I wonder, what have we, as I mean, I'm a British citizen as well.
Yeah.
You know, what have we actually? I have to be really careful what I say on the radio station, but sometimes I wonder. I mean, what we have left behind in those part of the world. I mean, John, maybe you can share some light, being a historian. I mean, I always wonder whether we left good examples behind. I mean, apart from the railways infrastructure in parts of India, I mean, what other?
I could probably name one more thing, which was probably the farming and irrigation. I mean, which is probably irrigation, obviously getting water to land and stuff like that. I mean, that was one of another thing, because obviously the cotton industry used to actually come. I'm British, come from India to the UK. That was probably sugar cane was probably another. So but water irrigation and probably the railways. Would you agree with me, John?
Yeah, I mean, agriculture still employs more people in the countries of Indian subcontinent than any other sector, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
And many people are just getting by, what we call subsistence farmers.
Yeah.
Or some work on plantations, like tea plantations and so on. But it is striking, going back to what Anam said about about Bengal, going back several hundred years, it was the richest part of India and one of the richest areas of Asia.
Yeah, that's right.
And where is Bangladesh now? It's not there, is it?
Yeah.
So, what's happened in between?
And that's the point
and it's true. I do think that obviously the British Empire has extracted a lot of wealth from Bangladesh and not left it in a very thriving state. So that's definitely a big part of the story. Well, that is the consequence of it.
Once a rich nation, people from this part of the world used to go there to look for jobs, business and trades, and now people are trying to come to this part of the world to find jobs and wealth and a better lifestyle. Whereas once upon a time, people used to go to that part of the world for a better lifestyle, and it's quite interesting how things have changed. And the funny thing is, this change didn't come by natural causes, or by choice, but it actually. This change has come about by, what's the word? Man-made. Is it? Those choices are man-made, basically, effectively.
Yes.
And man-made, and by who? And I don't like answering that question.
Well, I think it goes back to your point again about the leadership. I mean, if you look at both countries, even India to a point, it's who's been running the country and who's been controlling it, and whether the leaders, the governments have actually been helping the people, or have they been helping themselves? These are the questions that you've got to ask yourself.
I mean, it also boils down to not just the leaders, but the type of leadership.
Yeah.
And what we found that predatory capitalism plays a key factor. It plays a key role in the situation of that part of the world. I mean, going back to India or the Middle East. What was the East India Company? I mean, we talk about East India Company, but we never look into what they're all about. It was all about profit, money, business. In other words, it's all about capitalism, exploiting. And the strangest thing about this East India Company was that it came with its own army.
That's right.
I mean, what company nowadays in the modern day comes with their own
I mean,
I mean, it's unheard of nowadays, But that is how it came about. So I mean, it's interesting to say. I mean, and certainly the use the use of the word predatory capitalism, it fits in quite well with the East India Company. I mean, I hear the term nowadays, and I'm thinking this is nothing compared to what used to happen. I mean, nowadays it's quite sophisticated.
Obviously, the predatory capitalists are probably like the banks and hedge funds. They're the modern day
predatory capitalists of today, aren't
yeah,
they?
yeah,
They
yeah.
are. But it is true, isn't it? Like, if we just look at Bengal, as we have been looking at, it's the economy was adapted to the needs of the East India Company and the profits it was making, and as a result became impoverished, or shall we say impoverished the inhabitants of the country. I mean, the British Empire, though, it did leave, it didn't destroy the elites of the subcontinent, did it? It left them in place, it co-opted them.
Yeah.
I mean, so when the British left, there were elites in all these countries that were highly educated.
That's right.
And often very wealthy. And the result is that they haven't really ruled the countries very well since. And it's a question of distribution of wealth, isn't it?
That's right.
Because India is in some ways doing quite well nowadays, even just in the last 20 years. I'm just talking about India, which is in the news most. You know, it's got thriving technology, computer and so on. Producing money, but it's not being distributed.
That's right. I mean, I think it's there's two types of people in the subcontinent. One is you're either mega wealthy or you're very, very poor. I mean, there's no middle classes, nothing. That's how I can describe it. That's the type of people we seem to have in the subcontinent. But again, the subcontinent is developing. Obviously, in Pakistan at the moment, you got the CPAC port, which is being developed by the Chinese, and obviously with Bangladesh as well. I mean, it's just going to take a bit of time for the subcontinent and countries to actually catch up and actually have the right type of leadership to guide the people and guide them on the right path and the right way. Would you agree, John?
Yes, and it's a big task, isn't it? And this is it's very difficult to know the best way forward, but it obviously needs, well, we as Labour Party members and socialists, we would say we need, the workers' movement and the community movements need developing and enforcing, and actually need to be able to actually induce the elites actually to give way and share their wealth and opportunities, to become to establish a more equality of opportunity, and eventually of outcome in these countries.
It's quite interesting. I mean, we talk about, if you look at China, I mean, at the end of the day, it's a communist country, but at the end of the day, again, it's the same situation there. I mean, you're either mega rich or you've got nothing there, or you're very, very poor. There's no in between. But again, it's corruption, and I think corruption is a blight on the subcontinent, and especially in most governments there. There are currently, even in Pakistan, obviously you get some political movements, and the word democracy, where does it arise? I mean, is Pakistan a democratic country, or are we talking about a corrupt country? Or the same goes for India. Are we talking about a corrupt country or a more democratic country? But when you talk to residents of Newham from the subcontinent, they will probably tell you. Some would say to you, some that are benefited probably say to you, "Oh, it's a great country," but some that ain't would probably say it's a corrupt country with the governments there. Would you agree?
Say that again. Sorry, chaps. I mean, what country's corrupt? I mean, I'm not going to call any country corrupt live on air, but we're talking.
I'm just talking about governments in general. I mean, would you say are we talking about the governments being corrupt or the country? Yeah, it's just the ruling classes. This is what
talking about India and Pakistan.
Yeah, the subcontinent. At the end of the day, we're talking about.
I mean, I wouldn't say it's quite corrupt. I mean, I wouldn't use the word corrupt. I mean, it's the nature of the way the structures are laid out in that part of the world. The structures are albeit In the name of democracy, I mean, is it real democracy? I mean, we can
Exactly.
even say that about countries like UK. I mean,
Yeah.
do we really have democracy?
Yeah.
But that's a different debate to have. But if you look at India as a whole, I mean, the nature of the country is such. I mean, if you, like you said, you spoke about the divide. You're otherwise all the way up the rich, or otherwise you're
Yeah, that's right.
right at the working class at the bottom end. I mean, I think in India you got two types of working class background. One who are almost destitute, struggling to make ends meet
Yeah.
by probably doing labor work on the
Yeah.
paddy field,
Yeah.
or doing domestic servants, etc. And then you've got the other level of working class who are probably educated and doing a professional job, maybe as a school teacher, but
Yeah.
the salary is
Yeah,
peanuts.
that's right.
And they're also struggling to make ends meet. So they got those two types of working class element, and then you're supposed to have a middle class element in India. And I'm not sure how you define the middle class element. Do you define them as someone who's working on a decent salary, able to take a massive amount of loan to pay for a property, and then for the rest of his life is paying off that loan on high interest?
That's right.
And you've got that element there, and then you've got the filthy rich who are the elite and who are the politicians. And I'll find, if you look around, most of the politicians, if not all, come from a filthy rich background. I mean they're bloody so rich.
Well,
And
we'd
they're
say like an industrial background. I mean, a lot of them are industrialists that have exploited the country.
So when you have that form of democracy with all these rich dudes running, even if you look at the party which is supposed to be more socialist, you've got some filthy rich people governing. If you come from the party of, a right wing party, they're also filthy rich. I mean, if you look at, majority of their Congress or the Parliament is full of filthy rich people, and when you have filthy rich people governing for the poor.
It makes a mockery of it. It makes a
So, that's the situation there. I mean, there are probably other elements of misapplication of the system, but that's something probably we should have another slot to discuss. I mean, we can't discuss it in a few minutes. But I think the fundamental problem is that. Does democracy really work? In that part of the world, you have to be rich to be a politician.
You've opened up a new question which we haven't got time to discuss thoroughly. It's about parliamentary democracy.
Well, that'd be another show for another time.
These countries have got parliamentary democracy, but it's only part of the story, isn't it? It's not enough. We could say that in this country too. Parliamentary democracy is good, and local democracy, where we elect councils, but it's not full democracy, is it? And we're trying to perhaps explore this in Newham now, about to involve.
But then,
more.
John, you've got to look at our parliament. I mean, how many parliamentarians are upper class? They come from a wealthy background. I mean, if you look at majority of the Labour Party, I mean, they come from they don't come from affluent background.
Well, they come mostly university graduates now, though, and that's changed in the last few decades. I think the thing is, to be an MP now, you need to have a good education, really.
That's right.
Very few manual workers in the British Parliament nowadays, less so than they used to be.
John Major did not have a GCSE, I was told, or even an O-level, and he was the Prime Minister of this country.
He certainly didn't go to university. He was a rare exception.
Yeah.
He was part of an elite.
Well, he became so, but he wasn't born into it.
No.
And also somebody else who never went to university was Jim Callaghan, the Labour Prime Minister. But there were exceptions in the last 50 years.
And the next future Prime Minister might also
Inshallah
be someone someone who hasn't got a degree.
Who's that going to be?
Let's see. My prediction. My prediction: we'll have the next Prime Minister of this country as someone who didn't go to university.
We are going to end the show there, and I'd just like to thank my guests, John Whitworth and Anna Mislam, councillors John Whitworth and Anna Mislam. Can you just say goodbye to our listeners? And it's been great, and you have been listening to Ramadan FM 2018, and thank you for listening, and I will see you next Tuesday on the Community Hour at 3 o'clock. Thank you, listeners. Bye.
Cranbrook